they can be very, very strong in their manifesting their feelings, as we read when we read the Rivash, his tshuva to the Tashbet, saying, actually, you've mistreated me, so I'm tempted to disagree with your halachic ruling, but I shan't because I prefer the truth to my ego. So there we are. So what do we have this evening? We begin with Shut Binyamin Ze'ev. Say it's a tshuva I picked out of a bag. Shut Binyamin Ze'ev Siman Kuf Peitet. We'll read about him in a second. But I will begin by reading the first bit. Line 5. Biyoti mitgorer po. What's the next word?
Venezia.
Venezia. Thank you, Jean.
Old writing.
And that is where? Venice, in Italy. So Rabbi Binyamin Ze'ev ben Matityahu lived in Venice. ראיתי קצת אנשים שמניחים תפילין של יד ושל ראש מועמד. And I saw a few people, not too many, were putting on both of their tefillin, that's the shel yad and the shel rosh, standing up. הוכחתים על זה. And I told them off about this. שלא ירגילו עצמן בחיי גוונה. They should not continue and get used to doing this. ושאלוני תם הדבר. And they said, but why not? והראיתי להם מה שנמצא בזוהר. I showed them the passage in the Zohar that says, bad person, if you do not put your shel yad on sitting down and your shel rosh on standing up. והביאו הגאון המחבר בספר האגור, and the Agur cites it. Anybody remember immediately the name of the author of the Sefer HaAgur? It was
Yehuda Landau.
Yaakov Landau. Thank you, Jean. You're accumulating brownie points very fast this evening. B'dinei tefillin siman pei daled. V'yesh tam gadol v'nachon mitzad haKabbalah. That's how the Agur, or Rabbi Landau, ended up. Important reason given in the Kabbalah for doing this, as our Sephardi brethren do by and large, and some Hasidim. V'ani ha'hediot Binyamin, and I, the simple and rather modest and withdrawn Binyamin, etein lecha tam ledavar, I'll give you some kind of nice little flourish. Shetfilah shel yad miyushav v'shel rosh mu'amad, to help you understand that the shel yad is put on sitting down, the shel rosh standing up. Yes, siman ze liadecha, and preserve this hint. Litfilah shel yad, relation to tfilah shel yad. We have a pasuk in Parashat Beshalach, the end. Ki yad al kesya. Now the full pasuk is ki yad al kesya milchama l'Hashem b'Amalek midordo. At the end of the encounter with Amalek in the book of Shmot, when Bnei Israel, with Moshe's help, were able to defeat Amalek, it says that God exclaims, my hand will be, as I sit on my throne, my hand will be raised, lifted up, in order that the war with Amalek will continue midor dor throughout the generations. So what do we see here? That case ya, God sits on the throne, and the word before the case ya is yad. So when you have your tefillin shel yad, it should be on the kisei when you're sitting down. And of course, you can fantasize about God's throne and your hand, and we can go on a Kabbalistic adventure here. But Rabbi Binyamin Ze'ev gives us a hint from a well-known pasuk. So if you forget, remember ki yad al kesya, yad on the kisei. And then tfilah shel rosh mu'amad, line 9, you put on your shel rosh standing up. Ki shem Hashem nikra alecha v'yaru mimeka. There are a couple of places in Shas where we read that both in Malachot and in Chulin, actually it's the end of Perek Kisui Adam, mamash at the end, there's a pasuk in Dvarim that the name of the Lord is upon you and the nations will fear you. Halavai. But the Gemara says that is the Tefillin Shel Rosh. They are revealed, they're upon you, everybody sees them, and they strike terror and fear into the nations. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Gadol Omer Elu Tefillin Shebarosh. Ot hen l'chol lakol. They're a sign to all. Kishem Hashem nikra alecha. The name of God is upon you. Kidepirish Rashi zal hatam. Now, the name of God means that you should stand up. If you are manifesting God's name, then it should be standing and everybody else should stand. So that's your hint to remember. What does it mean that we have the sign of God on our Tefillin Shel Rosh? Well, what you have on two sides of the Tefillin Shel Rosh, the bite, the box.
Okay.
You have to unmute if you want to be heard. What you have? Shin.
Shin.
Two
The shin?
shins. Two shins. Now, is that Shem Hashem, God's name? No, not by itself. What you have at the nape of your neck, the very back of your neck, if you're a
Daled.
Daled.
a daled, okay? Which is why the Sfardim and many Sofrim insist on having the Tefillin Shel Rosh's knot at the back on the neck as a daled, not as
Yud.
two yuds, okay? So once you have the rov, the majority of God's name, Shad, that's enough for Shaddai. And your yud, of course, could be on your shadyad, the bit is that exposed that you tuck in to the yad. So this is a typical Kabbalistic response. But who is Rabbi Binyamin Ze'ev? Okay, now line 12. I can see a ceiling, so I'm going to go past the ceiling, and I'll have you to read in English. Bernie, you're on. I see you.
Rabbi Binyamin Zev, 1475 through 1540.
45.
Was a Romaniot and rabbi of Arta, Epirus, one of the oldest and most significant Romaniot communities.
Okay, what is Romaniot or Romaniot
Greek.
or Romaniot?
Greek.
Greek. Thank you. Greek. The
It's-
oldest European Jewish community, the Romaniots, were an ethnic Jewish group. They trace their arrival in Greece to the time of Alexander the Great. Okay, so they really go back into the beginning of Bayit Sheni. They scattered in Asia Minor, spoke something called Yevanic, which is a mixture of Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. They were the native population in Greece mainly, in the Balkans, and also in parts of Italy. The Greek community was, of course, seriously massacred by the Germans, by the Nazis, and only a small group are left in Athens. There are communities in New York and in Israel and on the island of Chalcis. So if you have an opportunity to visit Chalcis, there is a Romaniot shul, and there is still a little bit of a community left. But during the 15th and 16th centuries, there was significant presence in Greek and also in the Mediterranean islands, places like Corfu, and he was. Bernie, give us a couple of lines, please.
He was a gifted he was a gifted student of the prominent Romaniot rabbis of the period, including Rav Kalev and Rav Binyamin ben Shemaria of Arta.
Arta is another significant Greek city, and did have before World War II a Romaniot community. And Rabbi
And Rav Gershon Pazo of Corfu.
Right.
A successful businessman, he combined business with the rabbinate and spent a lot of time in Venice. Eventually, he became embroiled in a number of disputes with his fellow rabbis because of his particularly lenient halachic rulings, especially in relation to well-known Aguna case at the time.
So already he's a little bit different, okay? He is a very successful businessman, and he writes tshuvot, okay? But he's very lenient. Shmuley, would you please take up the lenient cue? Line 18,
Yeah.
Rabbi David HaKohen of Corfu.
Rabbi Gershon of Venice, Rav Yosef Taltazak, and others.
Taitachak.
Taitachak.
Exactly, very good. It's not Japanese.
And others. and others were highly critical of his exceptionally lenient ruling and complained about his excessive independence. Hudan Yechidi Be'ilo
Ke'ilu.
Oh, Kilu
Linit Naharetz. Island,
Aha.
totally independent, not caring about his rabbinical colleagues. And then you're likely to get into trouble. Read on, Shmuley, another line or two. Although he replied,
Although he replied to his critics in a series of Responsa, eventually published in his Response Binyamin Zev in Venice in 1534, he was stripped of his rabbinic title by the rabbis of Venice in 1531 and deposed from the rabbinate of Arta.
in other words, if you break the mold, then action can be taken against you. It happens today, but in the old days, they were really serious. Took away his title and all sorts of other things, as we shall see. Yonat, would you like to read, please? Rabbi Azrael Diena.
Rabbinic, line 22,
Line 23.
line 23. I
Rabbi
see
Azrael Diena.
Rabbi Azriel Diena, rabbi of
Diena.
Sabioneta, and colleague of Rabbi Meir Katzenellenbogen.
Katzenellenbogen. The Maram Padua.
Padua, and nominal Afbedin of Venice, and Rabbi Ovadia Saforno.
Whom we know, the famous Bible commentator and physician.
Saforno was particularly critical. In the Responsa, he forbade Benjamin Zev to issue any halachic ruling on pain
No pain.
on pain of being put into heaven. Nullified all smichot awarded by him to other rabbis, and forbade anyone to describe him as Morenu Harav in the Arta region.
In other words, there's no fury like that of an angry rabbi who thinks that a colleague has broken ranks, and then he does terrible things. Avi.
Sorry, were these Venice rabbis Romaniot?
Absolutely not. They were either Sephardim, or they were refugees or children of refugees from Spain, or they were Italians, okay? Or they were Ashkenazim. Meir Katzenellenbogen doesn't sound like a Greek, does he? His name was not Dimitrios, okay? Katzenellenbogen, they came from Ashkenaz. Northern Italy, by the way, was very much influenced by Ashkenaz. It was again part of Austria, almost. So
he has a street name for him.
Very strong Ashkenazi, influence. And you can imagine, but it's a very perceptive point, Shmuley. There's no love lost between the Romaniots and the Sephardim, as we'll see shortly, okay? The plot thickens. Avi, the Venice rabbis, line 27.
The Venice rabbis refused to backtrack even after he and the son-in-law of Samuel Kali went there to argue his case personally before the Venetian Dayanim. It is noteworthy.
So we have we have a fight here, okay? A real fight. And the rabbis of Venice was the most important community in northern Italy. The Av Beit Din, Maharam Padua, a very eminent halakhic authority. None of them liked Binyamin Zev, okay? And we'll see that dislike continues even to the Marshal. But these tshuvot are remarkable, and they're still used from time to time in the area of Aguna law. However, read on, please. Avi, it is noteworthy.
It is noteworthy that in his Bet Yosef on Eben Ha'ezer, number 17,
which deals with the Aguna issue, Rabbi Caro
cites numerous responsa on the above-mentioned Aguna case, but omits any reference to those of Rabbi Binyamin Ze'ev on this matter.
Now, Shmuley, of course, his instinct is correct. We have a fault line here between the Romaniots and the Sephardim, okay? Rav Caro is, of course, an eminent Sephardi, born in 4088 in Spain, survives the Gerush, spends time in the Balkans, eventually has a meeting with his Maggid, the mystical night of Shavuot, goes on Aliyah, ends up in Sfat, and then we have the Shulchan Aruch, the Bet Yosef, the Kesef Mishneh, and a lot of Kabbalah. Now, let's have a look at the next one. Arnie, would you like to read?
We're going to which now?
Line 31, Rabbi Binyamin Ze'ev.
Rabbi Binyamin Zev was, however, defended by Rav Elisha
Eliyahu Elijah Kapsali.
the Romanot chief rabbi of Crete, who wrote a pamphlet entitled Ze'evim Torfim et Binyamin.
Now that, of course, is clever, because how is Binyamin described in the blessing that Yaakov gave to his sons?
Ze'ev.
Binyamin Ze'ev
Yitra.
Yitraf. So Binyamin is meant to be the one who's tearing prey like a wolf, but now the Ze'evim, these Sephardi rabbis, are tearing apart Binyamin Ze'ev, and Ze'ev is a wolf. So it's all very clever, but that's what rabbis are meant to be doing, playing with words and being clever. Okay, so in this context, Arnie, would you give us another line, please?
Context, it is noteworthy that in opposition to the many Sephardic refugee rabbis arriving in the Ottoman-controlled Greek and Balkan regions, he was an outspoken critic of the Spanish Anusim, Marranos, whom he described as less than Gentiles.
Now, if you read
Less
Shuvot
than the Gentiles.
Binyamin Ze'ev, he blasts the Anusim. Now, we know, and we mentioned this, and Jean, you will remember, what happened to the Rivash when he was in Valencia before he was able to leave for Algiers? Jean?
Eh bien, according to the non-Jewish testimony, it seems that that Rivash, in order to save his life, had to
Convert.
Had
Convert.
to undergo baptism and receive a non-Jewish name.
Yeah.
And we've been through this in detail in our Shiurim, of the Igeret Hashmad of the Rambam. Something similar may have occurred. And we know that Spanish Jewry had to deal with this. This is a major issue. And we didn't read the Tshuvot of the Rivash, the Tashbetz, about the trustworthiness of Anusim, whether they can act as Edim in court. But they were generally very lenient. And here comes this Romaniot, pokes him in the eye and says, "You're worse than Goyim." So you can imagine there was little love lost between the Romaniots and the Sephardim. And I'm just going to go left field for a bit and say, does the name Dona Grazia Mendes mean anything to you?
Sure.
of course.
He was a great leader, and she was in Turkey.
She
Yes, but
ended up in Turkey. She began in Spain and Portugal. Her husband,
in Antwerp.
Francesco Mendes, was the spice king of Europe. He was a billionaire, okay? And he was a Marrano.
Oh,
You know, he was the descendant of a line of rabbis, the Benvenisti family. Became Mendes, Francisco Mendes. He and his brother ran this amazingly profitable spice business. They had factors, that is, agents in various ports. And amongst the things they did was they helped Marranos escape from Portugal. Eventually, Dona Grazia and her fortune, left Spain and went via Venice, eventually to the Balkans, and landed in Ragusa in the Ottoman Empire, and eventually made her way to Constantinople. So this is and she supported the yeshivot of the famous Sephardi rabbis who ended up in the Balkans at the time and in the land of Israel. She's most amazing woman indeed. Chana Mendes, Renia, and what she tried to do on one occasion was, because Jewish agents of hers were burnt by the Inquisition in the port of Ancona, she wanted to get the Jews together to put an economic boycott on the port of Ancona and to divert the trade that the Jews were responsible for, the Marranos, Instead of landing in Ancona, they'd land in Ferrara, and where the Duke was much more friendly.
Not in Pesaro?
I think it was Ferrara. It could be Pesaro. We will have to check. You may very well be right. I'm doing all this from memory. And
I think it's Pesaro.
and she tried to get all the prominent rabbis of the time to sign on to this ban, that the Jews would take their revenge. For the first time ever, Jews are actually flexing geopolitical muscle, and are punishing the Catholic Church, the Holy Roman Empire, the Inquisition, for having burned Jews. Did the ban succeed?
No.
No, it didn't. Because a Romaniot rabbi by the name of Yoshua Sonsino put the spoke in the wheel, and he refused to go ahead, and he wrote Shuvot, and he tried to convince as many of his colleagues as he could there was no halakhic basis to this particular ban, and it failed. There were, of course, other reasons too. There were economic reasons, there were political reasons, but the tension between the Sfaradim and the Romaniots ran deep, just as in Algiers, the Berbers tried to stop the boatload of Spanish refugees landing. You may remember that was the whole starting point for the chief rabbi debate in Algiers. So, you have to put all of these things into their historical context, and then you can understand.
I only
Sometimes
come here, Boo. You have to
what happened.
turn.
Can we all mute, please, if we're having conversations? But now let's get back to the
You have to turn.
nitty-gritty, okay? The publication of Responsa Binyamin Ze'ev.
You have to turn.
Yes.
Can we please have some muting there? Robert, that's all. You're on. Robert?
Yeah,
Great.
where are we?
Okay, we are
36.
line 36, page 1. The penultimate line, the publication.
The publication of Responsa Binyamin
Responsa.
Ze'ev,
Yeah.
the Tshuva,
The Shuvot of Binyamin Ze'ev received
critical reviews both from the Maharam Padua and the Maharshal, who wrote.
In other words, the Ashkenazim, especially the Marshal, ganged up on Binyamin Ze'ev, and he was, by the way, a rare figure because he was able to finance publication of his Tuvot in his lifetime. So they wrote very critical reviews, and I will take this on. I'm on now page 2, line 1. Omarein, this is the Marshal who we know. Omareinu Harav. Rabbi
Thought they weren't supposed to call him Moreno Rav.
He does, yeah. But that's, I guess, the style, and he hadn't, the Venetian rabbis hadn't communicated with him. This was also some time afterwards. But remember, Shmuley, where must you not refer to him as Moreno Rav? It says so. In the region of
Venice.
Arta, where he was the rabbi. Remember, he was thrown out. That's what it says. If you look back, you'll see in the Arta region. And where was the Marshal?
In Poland?
In Poland, in Lublin. He wasn't anywhere near Arta. So, but sharply pointed out. All right, this is already a little less respectful. The book that he published that he called Binyamin Ze'ev, Lo Dai Shetab Lashon She'etik Min Mordechai. I'm not going to give you the halakhic history because that would take us the rest of the evening. But there is that, but at issue is a line from the Mordechai. Rabbi Mordechai Kohen lived in the 14th century. He was a Talmud of the Maharam of Rothenburg. He wrote a very interesting exposition of halakha attached to the Masechtot of the Talmud, but he was cut down in his life, in his prime, with his wife and kids in the Rindfleisch massacre. Germans were always massacring Jews in one way or the other, and but he's an important Ashkenazi source. Now, Binyamin Ze'ev, who is a Talmid Chacham, as I said, a very outstanding Lamdan in the Romaniot community, He cites a line from Mordechai on the Tshuva about Agunot. Kasher Avair, I'm going to explain to you what the mistake that Binyamin Zev made. Ela Avzo Ta Bipshat Mordechai. Not only did he misunderstand the Mordechai, Vafach HaKara Pia, and reach the opposite conclusion to the one that the Mordechai actually reached. Mordechai may be Rayali, Sumimenu Velo Lahatir. And he totally gets the halakha wrong. The Mordechai is not a matir, he's an asur. So clearly you have another way of criticizing the fact that the Mordechai, that Binyamin Zev was always looking for heterim, especially in relation to agunot. And the established rabbinate was far from wanting to bend over backwards in these cases because of the fear of get museh, a compelled get, and the possibility of mamzerim should a woman remarry and the get is not a valid get, or her husband's death has not been established properly under Jewish law, and therefore they would rather she remained an aguna than to risk bringing mamzerim into the world. ועכשיו אני אספר גימל טעויות. Rabbi Binyamin Zev made 3 mistakes. שלא דקדק בגמרא כלל. Now the problem is that he didn't go back to the Gemara. Now you will remember that the Marshal said you cannot rely upon compilations of halakha, codes of law, handbooks of Jewish law, if you don't understand the principles from which the halakha springs. That is the sugya and the Gemara with Perush, Rashi, and Tosafot, as we will learn in a couple of weeks when we start the Ramah. Then you're likely to make a mistake. Okay, it's like cooking. It's like cooking from a recipe without understanding how cooking actually works. Okay, you miss the principle, you can easily make a mistake. Rak ma'ashera bepiskei haMordechai. Binyamin Zev lifted something out of the Mordechai, didn't go back to its roots, to its raglayim, to its feasts, as we'd say in Yiddish, to the Gemara, uva aguda perek hazahav, and to the aguda in perek hazahav. Hataut harishon, and now he goes into a long exposition, and I'm going to cut this short, okay? But he says that he misread. The Binyamin Zev says there's a Mordechai in Perek Chezkat Habatim, which is the 3rd Perek of Masechet Bava Batra, but he made a real mistake, and he misunderstood that the Zetzabocha, the printer, okay, the one who had typeset the Mordechai, made a mistake, and it was his mistake that he changed from Perek HaZahav to Perek Chezkat Habatim. You can go through and see how the Marshal reconstructs the mistake. But it's totally the wrong Masechet, okay? It is the wrong Perek, but because the Mordechai, the printed version of the Mordechai, cites this Perek in Gemara, Binyamin Zev simply copies that. So he's completely up the creek without a paddle. And the 3rd mistake he made was that he got the Gemara wrong. And I'm going to start now from line 12, the end, last 2 words. V'zeu chilul Hashem. Marshal says it's a chilul Hashem for a rabbi to give a halakhic ruling based on a halakhic compilation, whatever it is, without having done the research and taken the sugya from the Gemara through the Rishonim to the case that is before him. He apparently, or he holds out to the world that there is a psak din based upon the Gemara, and he never saw the actual Gemara, that if he had, he would have realized his mistake. The Gemara actually says this is Asur, and because of the way it's presented in the Mordechai, Binyamin Zev says, we have a heter here. And when he does get the Masechet right, and the Perek right, it's in Bava Metzia, 4th Perek, he never saw that either. Rak shehetik lashon haposkim, k'gon Mordechai v'Haga, ha'Maimuni, and the Hagot Maimuniot on Mishneh Torah, v'Ha'aguda, sheviviim sugyat ha'Gemara or Perush Rashi, but he didn't understand that. So here we have a typical line that the Marshal introduced. If you want to understand any halakhic sugya, you have to go back to the Gemara and work it out from there. You cannot rely on a later compilation or some kind of summary of halakha, because you are liable to make a very egregious error, bad mistake. Moreover, Binyamin Zev is not original at all. He has no good analysis of a law. He simply copies what others have written. Rak ma shehetik, he's a copyist. Al kein ani omer mazhir larabim. Jean, would you read the bold type, please? Line 16. Al kein.
על כן אני אומר ומזהיר לרבים שלא ילך שום אדם אחר ספרו, אפילו לאיסור, וקל וחומר להתיר.
Now, what does that mean?
That
I'm
when
warning you all, nobody should follow the Binyamin Zev, even if Binyamin Zev says it's asur. And certainly not if Binyamin Zev says that it is mutar, okay? אם לא,
אם לא שידקדק אחר דבריו היטב בסוגיות התלמוד והפוסקים, ויהיה פשוטו.
and he must be able to understand the pshat in the Gemara before he goes into the poskim and decide whether the poskim give us an accurate, best picture of the, and that's what the Marshal and Yam Shel Shlomo tried to do. That's why he was opposed to writing Hilchot Shabbat, Hilchot Yom Kippurim, Hilchot Ishut. He says you go to the Gemara and you base your halachic rulings on perik by perik, masechet. Therefore, he didn't finish the entire Shas in his lifetime, and only some of his masechtot are available to us. But that is the way to go. Kichol dvarav,
גנובים וערוכים בפלפול שאינו לצורך וכנגד פנים מראה אחור.
and instead of looking at the front, he makes you look at the back. In other words, this is a very severe criticism. ולא הלך בדרך המחברים כגון מהריל, ומהריק ומהריו, שכל דבריהם נכוחות, ואפילו מעריק שמעריך הרבה מקום דבר קשורים כשלשלת של ברזל. You need an iron chain that connects you to the sugya in the Gemara. ומגיע עד רום שמיים, and that takes you to the height of the heavens, larov charifato. The shari li mari, and now I hope that God will forgive me. I doubt if Binyamin Zev is a tzaddik. Imu tzaddik. Lama hivi HaKadosh Baruch Hu takala al yato. Why did God allow him to make such a terrible mistake? Halo hu haya hakotev. He wrote, v'natan nitfus hasefer miyado umipiv. Mashma, he's not a tzaddik either. So that's what the Marshal thinks about Binyamin Ze'ev. And I've given you a little bit of the social background, the Romaniot, but definitely very care. There's something called in the language of the Poskim, Merkaz HaEmet, the center of the truth. And many a rabbi will write, Velule de Mistaf.
Nastafina.
Ve'latzet mi Merkaz HaEmet. I'm ashamed to leave that consensus. There is a rabbinic consensus about matters of halacha. You can push the envelope, but not too far. Binyamin Zev apparently went too far. So all of this is because he wrote something in his Tshuvot about tefillin shel yad, sitting down, and tefillin shel rosh, standing up. So let's move on to another authority who wrote about this, and that's the Shalah. Anybody heard of the Shalah?
Yes, but if you allow me, I want to ask, you know exactly what is Romaniot? I suppose, but that it is a parallel. It's the Romaniot are also depending from Israel, from Talmud Yerushalmi, I think. So it should be a variant of Ashkenazi, but I have no idea what it is, what it was.
Okay, the Romaniots were the Jews who say that they came to the Greek islands and the Balkans, that's the whole of Asia Minor, including Turkey, during the time of Alexander the Great and the Yevanim, okay? Their language, called Yevanic, is a combination of Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. Now, they're called Romaniot because that whole area, Asia Minor, was part of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. Hence, they're called Romaniot because it's Roman, but Eastern Roman and not Western Roman. Now, the traditions of Eretz Israel came with them, and Eretz Israel was passed on from Greece to Italy, and Italy went to Kilot Shum in Rhineland, Speyer, Vormeise, and Magenza. And that's the source of Nusach Ashkenaz. So Nusach Ashkenaz is actually Nusach Eretz Israel. And Nusach Sfarad is Bavel. The Shivot of Bavel, they began the settlement of Jews in Spain. There is a legend, you may remember, in Megillat Achimat about the 4 Babylonian rabbis who came to Spain, and they were forced to stay there, and they set up Spanish Jewry. So in broad terms, most academics and scholars of Nusach and Minhag say that Ashkenaz, original Ashkenaz, is Eretz Israel, and original Sfarad is Bavel. And the Romaniots are clearly part of Eretz Israel. And eventually, as I said, it went from Greece through Italy, through the Kalonymus family, who came from Lucca in southern Italy, and then it went to Shum in the valley of the Rhine.
And their pronunciation was like a Ashkenazi or like Sfaradi?
The pronunciation, I'm not sure. That already is beyond my my linguistic research. But have you ever heard a Yemenite, Davin?
Yes.
And what does it sound like?
It's
Arabic.
a little bit like the pronunciation of Ayin is Sfaradi, and the vowels are Ashkenazi.
They definitely sound as if they're a bunch of Litvaks. Okay? They might say Jafen, and they say an Ayin, but it's Baruch Ata Hashem Eloheinu, almost. Okay, and sometimes it sounds like Ha'elam. So it's a combination, it's a mixture. And to go back, you'd have to be an expert, really. Eventually, of course, the Romaniots, they have a type of Sephardic pronunciation, but it has a bit of the Yemenite or the Greek in it. So, all Greek to me. Let's move on to the Shalah. What do you know about the Shalah?
The Shalah wrote a special tefillah about educating children. Tefillah lechinuch ha'eladim, that they always give out in schools.
Okay.
A big Kabbalist.
And when is it accustomed to this day to recite Tefillot Shalah? Which month? Thank you, Yael. Sivan. Rosh Chodesh Sivan is the time when even today Orthodox Jews will recite Tefillat Shalah because the Torah was given in Chodesh Sivan. But in broader terms, the Shalah was both a posek and he was a important mukubal. He was a Kabbalist too. And one of the few rabbis who were called Kadosh. Thank you. One of the few who were called Kadosh. We have Rabbeinu HaKadosh, who is who? Rebbe. We have the Shalah HaKadosh. And who else do we have?
The Or HaChaim
The Or HaChaim HaKadosh. And most important of all,
The
Ari HaKadosh, exactly. So we have a holy quartet here. And one of them is the Shalah. Anybody who is well known for being very holy, very spiritual, not of this world, okay? And the Shalah, Rabbi Shaya Levi Horowitz, was indeed an ascetic and given to mystical practices, and definitely a very saintly figure indeed. So let us move on. I don't know if Morley Franks is around. If I don't hear anything, I will move down to Yael. Yael, would you like to read?
Yep.
Okay, 26, Rabbi Isaiah Levi Horowitz.
Rabbi Isaiah Halevi Horowitz, 1555 to 1630, also known as the Shelah Kadosh after the title of his best-known work, was a prominent rabbi and mystic.
So
born in-
how do we get from Shelah to his best? What work did he write? What was the name of his book? Shelah.
Shnei Luchot HaBrit, no?
Shnei Luchot HaBrit. Okay, there we are. He's very holy. All right. He was born in Prague.
He was born in Prague in 1555. His father was a notable scholar and author
Yeah.
and a disciple of the Rema. He studied under Rabbi Joshua Falk Katz and Rabbi
The author
Natan
of
Nota Shapira.
the Prisha, the Sefer Mirat Einayim, the Sma on the Shulchan Aruch, and Rabbi.
Natan Nota Shapira.
What do we know about Reb Nosson Nota Shapira? We talked about him in the Shiur 2 weeks ago.
Also a big Kabbalist.
A Kabbalist. Do you remember his book? Megale Amukot.
Ah oui.
But what context did we talk about him? He was an ancestor of whom? Rabbi Pinchas Shapira, who had to walk the gauntlet, remember? And a story by Yitzchak Leib Peretz, the Shapira brothers who ran the Hasidic printing press in Slavuta. Reb Pinchas of Koretz, their ancestor, was Reb Nosson Nota Shapira, and his great-great-grandmother was who? Miriam, Gloria Shapira, who was a only Ashkenazi female Rosh Yeshiva. There we are. Okay, let's go. So
in 1590 in Lublin, he participated in a meeting of
the Council
of Four Lands, and his signature appears on a decree that condemns the purchase of rabbinic positions.
Oh, Shelah Kadosh said, I hate the practice. Rabbis would buy their rabbinic positions. Graft, corruption, didn't spare the rabbinate at all. And it goes back to the Gemara. The famous Yerushalmi says, Ilin demitmanin bakaspa. Those who are appointed to the positions because of their wealth. That happened too. It wasn't their wealth, it was their father-in-law or their father. But there we are, rampant corruption all over. Last line, please, in 1606.
In 1606, he was appointed rabbi of Frankfurt, and in 1614, he assumed the prestigious position of Av Bedin of Prague.
Okay, when we talk about the Nodav we will learn how prestigious Prague was. So let's see. In 1621, I'm going to go back to the top of the list. And thank you, Yael.
No.
I see that we are back with you, Shmuley, I do believe.
In 1621, he went on Aliyah and was appointed rabbi of the Ashkenazi community in Jerusalem. In 1625, he was kidnapped and imprisoned, together with 15 other Jewish rabbis and scholars, by the Pasha Ibn Farouk and held for ransom.
Anytime you need the cash, you imprisoned a few Jews and you got the money you needed.
After 1626, he moved to Tzfat and died in Tveria in 1630. He wrote Kabbalistic, homiletical, and halachic works and was an early proponent of Hasidic ideas such as serving Hashem in joy and converting the evil inclination into a force for good.
Okay, so this is already a source of many ideas that the 18th century Hasidic Rebbes, the Baal Shem Tov and his students, are going to propound. Okay, the Shelah is an interesting figure. He's both a great halachist, but also a great Kabbalist, and he prefigures the Hasidic movement. Okay, so Avi, you're on, please.
His most important work, Shnei Luchot HaBrit, is an encyclopedic compilation of ritual, ethics, and mysticism, published in 1648 and many times since then. It has had a profound influence on Jewish life, notably on the early Hasidic movement, including the Baal Shem Tov. Rav Shneur Zalman of Liadi clearly echoes the Shelah in his Tanya.
The Shelah
also wrote the Shara Shemayim Sidur, which had an influence on the later Ashkenazi Nosach, and the well-known Tfilat HaShelah, which many recite on Rosh Chodesh Sivan.
which was the book and the prayer that Yael referred to. Now, how does he get involved in our discussion? I'm going to go back up to line 23. V'anachnu yoshvei Eretz Yisrael. After he'd gone on Aliyah, he's part of Eretz Yisrael. He says, we in Eretz Yisrael, v'chen yoshvim b'chol malchut Yishmael, and all those in the Islamic world, hanim shamchim acharei kabbalat hazohar. Again, the line goes between Ashkenaz and Sfard. Sephardim adopted the Zohar in a major way, okay? So we follow the Zohar, and therefore we put on our tefillin shel yad sitting down, as it says in the Zohar, and the other Kabbalists. And who are the other Kabbalists? I could have gone on a long list, but I've only given you a few. First of all, we're going to do Rabbi Menachem Rekanati, okay? The Rekanati is well known to us as a commentary on the Torah. He follows Ramban and Rabbi Noshe ben Nachman. Nachmanides was the first medieval rabbi to incorporate the Zohar into his commentary on the Torah. Why so? Because the Zohar never emerged in a printed form until the 13th century, as we know, okay? So I'm not going to rehearse our long discussion when we discussed the Zohar as to its authorship and whether it was written by Rashbi or not, okay? I refer you to that. But it was only in the 13th century that the Zohar bursts onto the scene, and it is received with enthusiasm in Sfarad and in the lands to which the Sephardi rabbis and their communities went to. So what does he say? The Rekanati, 13th century, ended up in Italy. Ulebatar yikshor kishura detfilin shel yad miushav, ulebatar tefillah shel rosh inu tefillah mu'umad. He simply tells us what the practice is, as if there's no question. Everybody puts on tefillin, puts on the shel yad sitting down, and the shel rosh standing up. So Rabbi Menachem Rekanati. Robert Vassal, can you please read from line 5?
Menachem Rekanati, 1223 to 1290, was an Italian rabbi, well known for his Kabbalistic commentary on the Torah, Perush Rekanati ala Torah, published in Venice in 1523.
And Venice was a very important printing city indeed. Anyhow, the commentary combines
the mysticism of the Hasidic Ashkenaz with that of the Ramban. A commentary by Reb Mordechai Yaffe, the Levush, was published in 1595 Lublin edition. It was also translated into Latin by Pico di Mirandola.
Now, those who followed the Zohar, Shiurim will remember Pico di Mirandola, a great humanist, a great literary figure, aristocrat, and as I said, really a prominent humanist, and he was a leading Christian Kabbalist. Now, why did Christians get interested in Kabbalah? Because the Kabbalah loosens up a lot of Judaism, okay? So we have a lot of symbolic stuff, and God is divided up into all sorts of things like Sfirot and what have you. Could that be the Trinity? And could that be a basis for convincing the Jews to change and become Christians? So Pico di Mirandola and a whole group of his colleagues were known as Christian Kabbalists, and they commissioned translations into Latin of Kabbalistic works. And the Rekanati was translated into Latin and used, try and convince the Jews to become Christians, okay? So we talked about that. I'm not going to repeat all of that, but the name will mean something to you. Robert, Rabbi Rekanati also wrote.
Rabbi Rekanati also wrote a halachic work, Piskei Rekanati, and a commentary on Tefillah and Ta'amei HaMitzvot, in which he attempts to combine Maimonides' Moreh Nevuchim with Kabbalistic doctrines.
Now, and again, this is something that we talked about at the end of our Shiurim on the Zohar, trying to make Rambam into a Kabbalist. And that's what they tried to do. The Mekubalim were very keen. And to this day, there are Hasidim or there were Hasidic rabbis who really worked hard on that. And they would say that the Moreh Nevuchim, I quoted this line to you, is a skula far emunah. In other words, if you think you read the Moreh Nevuchim and you come out with a strong faith, well, you must be reading it with a double seasoning of mystic spices to it before you actually come to your conclusion. But that was the view, okay? So we talked about that as well, but we're bringing together some themes, which is nice. The last work, I think, well, the penultimate work is the Sefer HaKaneh. Anybody heard of Sefer HaKaneh?
No.
Okay, it's a mystical work, like Sefer HaPliyah and Sefer HaTemunah. We're not quite sure when it was written, but of course, who would be the author of Sefer HaKaneh if we were going to be traditional? Rashbi is the Zohar, and who would have written Sefer HaKaneh? Rabbi Nechunya ben
Hakana.
who's meant to be one of the Tanaim, a mystical Tana, and it's an interesting work. What does it say there? Now that's a pasuk we know very well. It's from Tehillim. And what would it mean, pshat wise? It would mean, and you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, you're as it were immersed in the praises of Israel. But Sefer HaKaneh says, when you want to be holy, you have to sit down. V'ata kadosh yoshev. So when you put it on your tefillin, sit down. I mean, this is a typical. Yeah, but so the kadosh is kadosh. You take the daled and the vav and the shin. I mean, you can do all sorts of things once you go off on a Kabbalistic limb. And he says, think about it. Kadosh yoshev. Sit down when you're putting on your shel yad. So what is Sefer HaKanah or HaKaneh? Let's go back. Fabia's iPhone. Don't know whether Fabia wants to read. No, I don't think so. So I'm going to go back to the readers this evening. And we are with Shmuley again. Shmuley, you get to do a lot of reading.
Menachem Makanati, where do you want it from? From there?
On line 14, Sefer HaKanah.
Sefer HaKanah is a Kabbalistic work by an anonymous author, which most historians date to early in the 15th century.
So that's why we would have Zohar, Kabbalah, and the Tefillin Shel Yad being put on sitting down. Although the tradition
attributes it to the Tana of Nechunya ben Hakana. Like the Sefer Peliyah, it is written in the form of dialogues between the wonder child Nachum, who received heavenly revelations at the age of 5, and his father,
less than the age of 5, okay? And his father, Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana. Both books
contain material from earlier mystical writings and are sharply critical of purely exoteric halachic observance and accompanied by mystical intentions. In places, it is positively antinomian.
Antinomian means what? Antinomian?
Apikosish?
Not apikosish. Not accepting the rulings of halakha as being totally binding. Okay? In other words, pushing halakha.
The boundaries.
Right? Anti against nomos, the law. Okay. And as a result?
It was subject to criticism in the 19th century in traditional circles.
In the Lithuanian yeshivas, they didn't like the Sefer HaKanah, they didn't like Pliyah or Temunah either, because they really push the envelope. And then when we talk about Shabtai Tzvi and the Frankists, we'll talk a little about historical background here. The last source I think I'm giving you on the Kabbalah is, I don't know whether we'll get to Ezekiel Landau this evening, but we might leave in when we do the Nodab Yudah. We're going to spend a lot of time with the Nodab Yudah in Yirtzeh Hashem. So we'll probably end up with Rabbi Meir ibn Gabbai. Rabbi Meir ibn Gabbai was born in Spain. So who'd like to read this? Avi, you're on. Line 24.
Rabbi Meir ibn Gabbai was born in Spain toward the end of 1480. While the details of his life are not known, he likely lived in the Ottoman Empire after the expulsion.
Another Sephardi, okay, who has to leave.
Yeah, and probably died in Eretz Israel. He was a master Kabbalist and one of the first of his generation to develop a systematic approach to the Kabbalah. In that sense, he's a precursor of Rav Moshe Cordovero and the Ari. His first work, completed in 1507 and held in high regard, was Tolat Yaakov, a Kabbalistic exposition of the prayer ritual. His chief work, which he finished in 1531 after having spent 8 years on it, was Avodat HaKodesh, in which he expounds in detail his Kabbalistic system, making a close study of Maimonides in order the better to refute him. In
Refute what?
To refute Rambam's rational approach and
Oh.
change everything in the Moreh Nevuchim to Kabbalah. Arnie, can I disturb your rest? No, I can't. So let's move on to Bernie. Bernie.
Yes.
In 1539, line 31.
In 1539, he wrote an exposition and defense of the concept of the Sfirot under the title Derech Emunah, basing his work on Rav Azriel of Girona's Perush Eser Sfirot.
Now, we talked about the brothers from Gerona and a whole circle of Kabbalists in Gerona, Spain. Very important, okay, for the beginnings of Sephardic Kabbalah. In addition to
fundamental mystical doctrines such as the Ein Sof, emanations, Sfirot, Hekahalot, and uniting with the Shekhinah, Yichud. He also dwells on the masculine and feminine aspects of the Sfirot, which are the appropriate vessels for the proper development of the world.
You will remember that the Zohar makes a major meal as this Kabbalah of masculine and feminine. Okay, the two sides and the combination. Man unites in his soul.
Man unites
in his soul.
The race.
Line 37. Man unites in his soul, the rays. Bernie?
The rays of all the
Yes.
Are you there?
Sort of.
Zero.
Man unites in his soul.
On line, which are we on?
Line, the bottom of line 3.
37. And
Last line, page 3.
Last line, page 3.
Man unites in his soul the rays of all of the Sfirot, and is a microcosm of all the basic elements of being. His soul is in connection with the upper world, which it is able to influence and stimulate by its actions and aspirations.
And that was the appeal of Kabbalah. Things you do, words you say, actions like putting on tefillin will influence the world. It's a remarkable idea if you believe in it.
For everything that happens in this world reaches in wave-like circles to the uppermost regions. By recognizing and fulfilling the religious and moral precepts with the correct mystical intentions, one may advance the harmony and union of both worlds and bring about the ultimate yichud.
So the next bit is a tshuva of the Nodav Yudah about why we should not say the Shem Yichud Kudsha Berichu, B'dechilu Urechimu, before Omer and all other mitzvot, but the Kabbalists, before any mitzvah, would say the Shem Yichud. This is what it's all about. So let's just end up with what Rabbi Meir ibn Gabbai actually wrote in Tolat Yaakov about our topic before we move on to something completely different and we begin to study the Tshuvot of the Ramah, which we'll be doing next week. V'yaniach al yad miushav. I'm back on page 3, line 21. You should put your shad yad on sitting down. Ki be'isha karena miushav. Woman is identified with a sitting position. V'maskil yavin. But you have to be an intelligent Kabbalist to understand why. And I couldn't possibly tell you because None of you are adepts at Kabbalah yet, so I'm afraid this will have to stay with me. וצריך שתדע, כי כל הדברים שהם כנגדה צריכים להיות מיושב. Whatever you do in relation to the feminine side has to be carried out in what's called yeshiva.
Is it connected with Rachel?
The Hamashane, and if you change, הרי זה מהפך עולמות ומקלקל הסדרים. Hasdarim, you can cause panic and chaos in the lower world, and you don't know how much damage you're doing. But the Shel Rosh is the masculine side, and you got to stand up. As I said, this is a lot of Kabbalah, and we hinted at it when we studied the Zohar. Very important for Kabbalah to divide the world up between the masculine and the feminine. It's a lot more than masculine and feminine, okay? It's a deep idea about different forces, and the attraction then becomes very clear. Stop the share. When you are putting on tefillin, you're doing a cosmic act. From a Kabbalistic perspective, you can affect this world and the upper world, okay? You have tremendous influence if you do it right. But of course, doing it right takes a lot of knowledge and experience, which many of us do not have. So we simply put on our tefillin. But the Kabbalists know, very important, the Shel Yad must be yeshiva, because that's the feminine. The Shel Rosh is masculine, it has to be standing up. And the rest, as I said, I cannot tell you, because we would have to go to the mikveh, and we'd have to spend a few years studying all the basic stuff, and then we get to the upper realms. There are yeshivot of Mekubalim here and there. Anybody wants to sign up, they may or may not take you, I'm not sure. Okay, so that's it for this evening, folks. Next week, God willing, we'll start the Ramah. We'll start with a case of the orphan bride, but we'll be discussing a whole different topic, which is, what place does halakha have for human dignity, and when, if at all, does human dignity override halakhic norms? So all of that awaits us next week, same time, same place, all being well. And this, of course, the Ramah was a relative of the Marshal, but also a close correspondent. Marshal criticized the Ramah. The Ramah defended himself. So it'll be interesting to see what happened there. In the meantime, I want to bid everybody a very good night, okay? And hopefully we will see each other a week from today. There should be Besorot Tovot and a Chodesh Tov.
Amen.
Okay.
Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov. Okay, that's it. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.